in 1946, about 52 years ago. My assignment was to work partly on the survey of marine fisheries of North Carolina, and then I also was teaching in the zoology department. A pretty fine post was available then, actually through the Old Boy Network, which was very generous at times. They had me appointed as an associate professor while I was about 31 years old or some such thing. This survey of marine fisheries, which is this, was supposedly a true survey of the fisheries of North Carolina, but in reality it was an exercise to give a gentleman by the name of Hardin Taylor a chance to talk about his ideas on fisheries management. Hardin Taylor was an extreme capitalist. Some of you may have known him. He had taught high school here somewhere in North Carolina, and then he became president of an outfit called the Atlantic Coast Fisheries. I don't know much about it. He made his mint and then retired. His idea, which he talked up all over the place, wherever he could be heard, was that you didn't need any fisheries management at all. Let the fisheries deplete a stock to a degree, and then they'd better turn to something else or get out. And as they turned to something else, the stocks would kind of rejuvenate. It was an extreme capitalist approach to management, no management. And maybe for some of the Atlantic Coast stocks, it worked. But it certainly wouldn't work today. It's absolutely ridiculous as we see things today. Hardin Taylor worked out of an office on number 1 Broadway, which is Wall Street. He had an office. I used to visit there once in a while I was working on the project. He worked primarily with a slide rule. There was a secretary over in the corner who seemed pretty busy. We would work for a while on our problems and work. And then as we left, he would always check the big board. I didn't notice that he did anything, but he checked the big board. He met his wife somewhere, and he always took us out to Stouffer's for dinner. Later on, when Dr. Coker, who was the big shot, the head of the zoology department in North Carolina, visited him, he took Coker to the Waldorf. And when dinner was over, Taylor put a couple of 20s or whatever it took to cover the bill, and the waiter took it out and brought back the change, and Coker reached into the till and put it in his pocket. Hardin Taylor got his money's worth out of that incident. He went all over North Carolina telling people about it. My assignment was to summarize the hydrographic conditions of North Carolina. It was supposed to amount to about a third of the book, but it was dwarfed by Taylor, who spent most of the pages talking about his fisheries management theory. Few of you would know who was working on that project. They're all old-timers. It included Harold Hum, who was on our advisory board. It included Al Chestnut, who wrote a section on shellfish. And then we had some outsiders. Buck Ketchum of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute played an advisory role, and the famous Canadian oceanographer A.G. Huntsman helped out some. Of course, I'm not a hydrographer, and yet I guess what I did was fairly decent, because Bill Beaufort, who would be a good judge, thinks it's a pretty good and useful summary. I spent a few minutes this week looking at what I had written back in 1946. I had a section on productivity. I thought the following quote was kind of interesting. Quote, "Fertilizers may stimulate the growth of undesired instead of beneficial plankton algae, not to mention the fact that some species may react unfavorably when excesses involving numbers of microorganisms are produced." How was that for 1946? That very year, at the AAAS meetings, which were always held at Christmas recess in those days, the Old Boy Network moved up again and asked me, through Donald Davis, who was chairman of the biology department at the College of William and Mary, if I would head the Virginia Fisheries Lab. At the time, the University of North Carolina was thinking of their concept of developing a program here in Morehead City, and since I was on deck, maybe I would have had a good chance to be a big shot in that outfit. So I came down here to Morehead City to look things over, to compare it with the Virginia Lab prospects. I hit this place at the time that the Menhaden processing was at its peak. And that, I'm afraid, influenced me some to go to Virginia Fisheries Lab. When I arrived there, we had Jay Andrews. I wish he were here, because he's one of the great old-timers. We had him working on oysters. We had Van Engel on blue crabs. I understand that yesterday Van Engel told you that we didn't pay him enough. You said something like that, Van? We had a chap named Yoakum who was working on primary productivity. Later we filled the fishes gap with Bill Massman. I wish Bill, we've lost track of Bill. Somebody may know where he is, or perhaps he's passed away. He personified AERS in its early days. He would take some old wrapping paper and draw graphs right in front of your eyes and give his ideas on what was developing. In the old days, the AERS was to quite an extent a forum to express our new ideas and venture into what we were thinking. It's quite different from the formalized presentations of today. We later got a statistics guy to help with the fishes. Someone from the College of William and Mary chemistry department named Armstrong was working with us, and I can't remember what he did. A fellow by the name of Whitmire at the College of William and Mary was working on the economics of the fisheries. And in due course, we added Dexter Haven, who also worked on oysters. You see, we began to splurge. Actually, we had 2 people working on oysters. Now, we got along very well with our counterparts at Solomon's. We used to meet together. Van would compare notes with Francis Bevan, who some of you may remember, a really great oyster biologist. No, Andy did that. Andy and Van would compare notes with Gene Cronin on the blue crab problems. And of course, I was supposed to be Dr. Truett's counterpart, and I was in my early 30s, and he was in his late 50s. I did my best. We got along. I really enjoyed Dr. Truett. At one of our meetings at Solomon's, Dr. Roger Rebell, who was then at the Office of Research, showed up. And those of you who know Roger knows that he's not happy unless he has a big idea. And his big idea then was that we should have a special program on the bay focusing on estuarine oceanography. And that was destined to become the Chesapeake Bay Institute. And to activate this, he would put up through ONR $30,000. Maryland would have to put up 30, and Virginia would have to put up 30. What I remember about that was that Rebell, Bert Walford, who was then Chief Scientist of the National Marine Fisheries Service, and myself and the Commissioner of Fisheries of Virginia went to see the governor. And in about 2 minutes, we got the $30,000. I should point out that that $30,000 did not come out of the Virginia Fisheries Lab budget. It was a new added appropriation. Another big event of those days was finding a home location for the Virginia Fisheries Lab, which of course, as I think you all know, is the immediate predecessor, not immediate, there are different organizational patterns along the line of what is now the Virginia Institute of Marine Science. And we were in a garage in Yorktown. The people in York County wanted us to stay there, and they found some lowland, undesirable area down on the Potomac River that they were going to give to us. And it proved to be very awkward politically to turn it down because the state representative on our Fisheries Lab board was Paul Crockett, who was a neighbor and pushing us to go to stay in York County. Well, about that time, Andrews saw a for sale sign over in Gloucester Point. And it turned out there was a piece of property there in one location, right next to it, but between that property and the ferry property was some land that was not for sale. We somehow persuaded the guy that owned that property to buy downriver, and we bought him out. So we had two lots adjacent to what would be eventually state property and was then ferry property. It was a good setup. And there was another lot downriver that I bought personally, and I was going to build a house so that I could just roll out of bed and go to work. But I think I bought it for $3,000, and when we left Virginia, I sold it back to the state for $3,300. So you can see what a poor businessman I was. That's the property where Waterman Hall is now, and where we had a garden. Well, such was the setting in Virginia in those days, for those of us working together so effectively and cooperatively, and we thought we ought to learn something about what our neighbors were doing to the south, so a bunch of us came down here in 1948 and started the Atlantic Estuarine Research Society. With everything going so well, I thrived on the old boy network. You know, we didn't have any search committees then. There were only this and that and the other person available for any given job. We didn't have to go out and give a seminar to prove our worth. There were no short lists. It was a short list from the very beginning. I might add that there were no women. So that, of course, would cut the whole group down in half from what it is today. Well, we have these wonderful women colleagues, but women competition as well. You might wonder why I say anything about the conditions today, following the fact that everything went so readily for those of us in those old days. Well, I'm really concerned about the situation today. The institutions we're talking about have grown by leaps and bounds, but the number of possible good applicants to fill those positions way outnumbers the open positions. And I'm concerned because I have such a strong good feeling toward my young colleagues. Actually, anybody in the 50s or 60s I call young, but I'm thinking of people who are still working on their PhDs, much younger than that. And I'm concerned about their prospects and how it's all going to work out. I have no happy solutions. I think what we're finding, though, is that a number of the young folks today with their PhDs and so forth are using a lot of ingenuity to get into alternate positions. They use, other than the straight research institution or university type position, they're using much more ingenuity than I see on the part of their professors, who, many of whom still think the students they're teaching are destined to be, or should be destined to be, clones of themselves. Much more ingenuity on the part of the young PhDs. Then there are some who I find are stopping at the master's degree simply because they want to avoid being overqualified for positions that are available. Oh, I could talk about this for another 20 minutes and I won't go into it, but it is, to me, a great concern about what's developing in our field in terms of the imbalance between opportunity and numbers of well-qualified people. There's one little trick that I'm not going to get into it, but I wonder at times about this postdoc business.